To sew your welt pocket, you need the pattern pieces 11A, which is the front, the top welt, with a matching lining, it's 11B. And you need the underwelt, pattern piece 12A and 12B. For all of those, it's important that you pay attention to the grain line when you're cutting them. Also, you need the front of your jacket. Probably it's already assembled with the jacket, or you do it before you assemble it. But you need the opening mark on the front, and this is really everything you need. I prepared everything to be like a showpiece, so I can use contrasting thread to make it easier for you to follow along. Here comes my first tip and tricks for sewing welt pockets. It really depends on the fabric that you use, but I highly recommend to fuse the back of your pocket opening to have a cleaner finish, and also I highly recommend to fuse both top and under welt to have a smoother ride and a more long-lasting finish of it. To start with step 10A, you put everything aside that is not pattern piece 11A or 11B, so you put aside 12A, 12B and your jacket in general. We start with pressing the top welt, pattern piece 11A, all along the length of it, with the left side, with the wrong side inside, on top of each other with the edges. Afterwards, after pressing, you just place it on the long straight edge of your pattern piece 11B, which is your lining matching the top welt, and just pin it onto it. Make sure that your edges really line, and make sure that you have it right sides facing. So this is the right side of your lining, and yeah, well, this is the right side anyway, but this is how it should look like. So with 1 centimeter seam allowance all along the straight edge. This is what your top welt should look like now with a lining attached to it. This should be the right side of your lining, and if you turn it around, it looks already like the pattern piece that you have to sew to your front pocket. And yeah, this piece is already ready, prepared, and now we're switching. We put it aside and we are switching to the pattern pieces 12A and 12B. You place the pattern pieces as shown in the picture in front of you. I mean the picture in your instructions. Don't put them aside, you need them. This tutorial is just additional to the instructions. So, right sides facing you, and you will notice that your underwelt has some notches on one side. This is the side that you will just flip over to your lining. So here are the notches, and you will pin the lining and the underwelt together along the open edge, along the straight edge. This is what your underwelt looks like after sewing. Now you just fold it open and press the seam allowance into the direction of the lining, and yeah, the underwelt is already prepared now to be sewn onto the front jacket. You now take the front of your jacket with the marked opening for your pocket, and you take your top welt, you place this on the right side of your pocket opening, and you take the underwelt and place it in opposite. So this is the opening, and this is your guidance for how to place it on your front piece. You might have noticed that there are notches as well as on your top welt as on your under welt. Those notches will be laid and placed exactly where the mark, the line for opening on your on your front piece starts. So here it starts, we put a needle, we pin it, and here it ends, we take the needle, and we have the notch exactly where the line ends on your front jacket, and this is how you pin it. This is step C. So for step C, it says that you have to sew exactly on the previous seam. This is why I choose to make this show piece, because now I can use contrasting stitch to show you better what it means. The previous seam is the black seam. Now you will sew in between the needles, meaning in between the notches that are on your open straight edge, to sew the top welt to your front jacket. I hope it's visible. So you see that there is this red stitching line going straight across the previous seam, straight along the previous seam, and you see exactly where it stops. So here the red stitching stops. So this is the new seam which you use to sew the top welt to your front jacket. The black seam that you see that goes on to the end of your top welt is the old seam where you sew together the lining and the top welt. So it's important that you have a little bit of your top welt and edges unsewn to the front of your jacket. You will now take your under welt and put it right opposite your top welt with the opening line on your front jacket in the middle of both of those pattern pieces, and you will pin it again where your notches are. So here is one notch, place a pin. Here we have the second notch, place a pin. Now we have a little bit of something tricky. As you might have noticed, we have 3 sizes for the welt pocket as well as for the patch pocket, which means that to sew the welt pocket you need to catch up with the instructions, the written instructions. So for the sizes 1 and 2, we have a different distance for the seam. As for 3 and also for 5 to 7, we have a different distance again. So look up what your distance is. I sew a size 3 to 4. So I need to place my sewing line 2.5 centimeters away from the line on the front, talking the edge of your underwelt. Again, please take notice that also this sewing line does not go over the whole welt pocket piece, but ends where the notches are. So you want to mark where your line ends and where it starts to make sure that you don't sew the whole welt to the front jacket. Now you have finished step 10A, B, and C and D. This has been step C, this has been step D, and you are ready to open the pocket opening on your front piece. Please follow the instructions that I give you in a second, because otherwise it would be hard to sew the welt pockets. In step E, we're talking about opening the pocket opening, but not opening it fully. I always find it the easiest if I do cut already from the front to mark where the opening is. And then I turn it around. Now it's lying as you see it in your picture, in the written instructions. And you will continue to open it in the same distance to the sewing line. So it will be parallel, but you don't open it all the way to where you sewed, but you will stop like 2 centimeters before your sewing line stops. And now you will cut in diagonals to the end of your seams on the left and on the right of your pocket opening. Be careful that you don't clip into the seam, but stop right ahead of it. Also pay attention that you don't have any pattern pieces in between, otherwise it will be ruined. So we do the same for the other side. We do a diagonal cut right ahead to the end of the seam and do this on both sides. Now your opening is cut open, and in a second I show you how to flip through the pattern pieces. After cutting the opening, you will flip it to the front again, so the right side of your jacket is facing you, and you can just turn it through the opening. Make sure that you place the ends of your top welt and under welt on the inside of your front jacket. And now you see it already starts to look like a pocket, hooray! But to continue, it's important that we now put together the lining pieces. This is really helpful, that you don't get anything under the machine when you're sewing, and that you can press it nicely. So you will now press the seams apart nicely, and also you will take care that you will have a 90-degree angle here. This is something that you have to arrange when pressing. This is what your welt pocket looks like after you press it. And yeah, it already looks pretty finished, but there are a few steps that you have to do. We need to fix this, the fabric of the jacket, to the welt in this part and in this part. So to do this, we have pressed it. So when we fold the fabric back at this section, you have this pressing line here. You will pin this small triangle to the welt, and you will sew directly on the pressing line to have a neat seam line on this side that is hidden inside the fabric. Same for the other end of your welt. You fold it back and you pin it nicely and then sew in the pressing mark. Let's have a look how this looks like when we sew it. So we place our triangle with one end under the machine and start sewing. So we sew back and forth as usual, and we sew exactly in the pressing line. And it's important that you don't do a slightly curved sewing line, that you don't have a wobbly sewing line. It has to be really straight and nice. And you sew down to the other end of your triangle. So back and forth. And then you have a really nice sewing line here. Now we have really nice and crisp corners that don't move anymore because they are sewn. Yeah, now we can head to the last step of finishing your welt pockets. This would be sewing your lining. Turn your fabric to the wrong side and pin both pocket pieces to each other along the edges, align the edges, and then you will sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance and finish off with the desired method of your choice. I will go for the overlocker. What's important to say, it's also nice if you start your sewing line exactly where you ended the sewing line before, where you attach the triangles to your welt. So this is where you start your seam. You go all the way around the pocket and you will end it on the other end of your welt pocket.